With me some more.
And we're live.
Yay!
Hello.
Let's talk about touch, baby.
Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the good things. Let's talk about us.
I was
This evening, we'll be talking about touch. So if you are a touch. So that's what we'll be doing. We'll be talking about touch. Hi, everyone. As you know, I'm a co-founder and co-host of the Cheeky Natives. I always bring my girl with me. Hey, Alma, how you doing?
Hi, everyone. I'm super excited for today's conversation. I think that this is just the conversation to have on a Thursday, right? This is the way you start your weekend. So I'm super excited for today's conversation. Thanks, Tiff.
Hello.
I got shy. I literally just got shy. Live in living color. I was like, who, me? Me? Also, hey, y'all look good.
I'm just going to read the sort of blurb of the book so that you know why we're here today in celebration. Intimacy and love, past hurt, past shame and hurt, current pleasures and play, or ongoing disappointment or surprise. What comes to mind when you think about sex? Touch explores sex as a vast yet intertwined experience with oneself and between people. It draws on the experiences of sex from people across genders, sexualities, even borders. Sometimes political, sometimes personal, and often beautiful. Touch delves into the many ways in which sex features in our lives. Sex can be fun, tricky, heartbreaking, and at times non-existent. And this book covers all this and much more. Compiled by Tiffany and Kim, the pieces are real, expressive, poetic, touched by trauma, cathartic, and dare we say, sexy. And today we're going to just get into everything. So hello, Kim. Hello, Tiff.
Hi.
Please introduce yourself to our people.
Ooh, firstly, let me say that blurb sounds like fire. Like even I was just like, I want to read that book.
Like, I've never heard of something like this before. I need to buy this book.
This is so great. So introduce ourselves. I will go first. Hi, I'm Tiffany. Tiff to other people. I love the fact that people have been calling me Kags. I'm feeling that. I'm here for that. One of the compilers, co-founder of Holla Africa. I do 10 things sometimes. I'm just out here, author of Quirky Quick Guide to Having Great Sex. So good times. Good times. And this was
what are your pronouns, Tiff?
My pronouns are she, her.
Thank you. Kim, you're next.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Kim Vinfocho. I work in sexual and reproductive health and rights. I feel like I'm like a lot of millennials. You know, you do a ton of shit just to keep the boat afloat and to keep the creativity going.
To pay those bills.
And to pay the bills. But I also compiled the book They Called Me Queer that was published also by NB Publishers in 2019. And yeah, that's me.
And what are your pronouns? Hey, Kim, what are your pronouns?
My pronouns are she, they. And I really want people to just like fuck around with it, you know? Sorry, I'm going to not swear because I don't know who's watching. Hello, everybody. It does say for adults on the book, though. But yeah, play around. Gender fuck pronoun me.
Okay. And then we have Janine, who is one of the contributors. Hello, Janine.
Hi, everybody. I'm Janine, and I wrote a poem that is in this book. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm very excited to be featured.
And we also have the award-winning author, Sia Kumalo. Hey, Sia, how you doing?
Evening, everyone. I'm great. Thank you for having me. So I'm the author of a book titled You Have to Be Gay to Know God. I write about religion, politics, and sex, including erotica. And if I may just make a quick comment on Janine, your piece was not just a poem. It moved me because of the religious iconography.
Yes. You know, I have to tell you, I loved your book so much. And I gave it to my sister And I found so many of the themes in your book inspiring and interesting. And I was so gratified to be included in this book with you. So thank you so much for saying that.
Thank you.
And on that,
I really enjoyed your piece as well.
I love that.
Sorry to fangirl a little.
Guys, what is life if not for fangirling? I am so excited for today's conversation, right? And I think that we need to start talking about how this book came about, right? So Tiffany and Kim, okay, y'all need to talk about how you compiled a book about sensuality and sexuality during a Panasonic, right? And why you felt that this book was so timely. Okay.
Do you want to take this?
We felt it was timely. No. No, basically it was one of those things of me and Kim, we'd been having like a lot of conversations. We'd wanted to work together for years. Yeah. It wasn't even a case of like, oh, we're in a pandemic, we need to feed the hearts. And we literally just did what we wanted to do. It was like peak white boying, actually. If we're going to be completely real about it, it was one of those things. We had this idea. I'd done Quirky Quick Guide, like they'd done, they called me queer, and we're like, what if Quirky Quick Guide and they called me queer had a baby? What would that baby look like? And we're like, hey, let's ask people to write about sex. And it was just one of those things where we're just like, let's do it. Let's see whether anyone's interested. Let's see whether people will give us money for boxes and this and that and pay contributors. Let's see if we can get people from around the continent to write. So like really broaden it, like, and bring together both of our superpowers. Yeah. And it worked out.
It worked out so well. And I would say that it was very organic. Again, as Tiff said, we wanted to work together for so long, but things never really, and all of a sudden, just before the pandemic hit, we start chatting to each other and we're like, we're going to do this shit.
Yeah. It was a series of like wild voice notes. Let's do it. Yeah. But can we? No one will write. We'll make people write. Let's make a list. Let's invite everyone. No, we don't like anyone. It was brilliant. It was really great.
I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, this book for me is interesting because I've been thinking a lot about touch and thinking about the ways in which like the pandemic has deprived us of touch and how in many instances, like you don't realize, at least I didn't realize how integral part touch is in my life until the pandemic hit. And I'm like, OMG, like I'm really struggling to like exist every day because like, there's no one touching my body. I mean, yes, I touch it when I clean myself. And yes, I touch it occasionally for my own pleasure. But I need someone else to touch my body because I'm tired of touching my body, right? And so I want to begin about this concept of touch, right? So the title of the book is Sex, Sensuality, and Sexuality. And so to speak a little bit more about that, right? So we often think about the ways we as queer people have sex to just be so like one way. But the book really gives us a lot more than that, right? It gives us a lot more about thinking about non-sex as sex, right? Or abstinence from sex as sex, right? And I want Tiff and Kim, just before we get into the nitty-gritties of the pieces y'all contributed to the book, to speak about that concept, right? About why it was so important for you to speak about the broad spectrum of sex and non-sex.
Do you want to take this one, Kim?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, for us initially, the idea was like in our initial fun and frantic WhatsApp messages, the idea was more that it should be about the act of sex. So we thought, everyone's going to write about sex. We're going to, we're all at home. What else is there to do? But then the more we started to think about the brief and what we were going to send to the writers, we were like, as people who are also both part of the queer community, we know that sex spans over so many ways, right? It's not just the act of sex. It is also the so-called assigned sexes at birth. It's also what happens to your body when you were assigned that sex at birth. What type of oppressive systems exist? How do you interpret the term sex? When I ask you to write a piece about it, how are you going to interpret this piece? And we were like, we would be doing a disservice to the people that we invite and the people that we ask to write if we put it so narrowly for them to just write about the act of sex, because We want the spectrum of sex. We want people to write about not only their experiences, but also how now past those experiences do they observe those experiences? How are they now going to write about it and think about it in a different type of way? And so the pieces that we got for this book came, people wrote about abortions, people wrote about their sex assigned at birth, people wrote about, yes, the act of sex, but also just their thoughts on sex,
not having sex as well.
And also not having sex, people who are celibate, people who don't want to have sex, people who are just like, actually, don't touch me, yeah, you can touch, but also don't touch me, so there's like what we got back was just so much more.
It was like the entire experience of sex, because sex happens not only during the moment but before and after.
Yes.
And I think that was like the wildest thing for me, like seeing people and like not just like, oh, this is how we did the things, but like this is how it built up, this is how it didn't quite pan out, this is where it was great, this is what I was thinking on the way there, like just the entire spectrum of the sexual act outside of just the sexual act.
Yeah. And so, we just gave lots of freedom. And I think the book got rewarded because of that and the content.
I think that's like a great way for us to actually segue into the conversation with Janine, right? So Janine, I'm going to ask you to please read a little bit from your piece in the book, because I think that it spurred so much conversation between the Tokonolo and I around so much of the politics and the feelings around sex.
Oh, great. Okay, well, let me do something from part 2. This is my poem called Strokes. So I'll just do this bit. Desire is based on lack. I mostly think about what I would like to do without. No, I would not date me, as I am both physically and emotionally unavailable. I only have about 3 extra hours a week, and I prefer to use them to listen to music and not think. Someone might permanently fit into my lifestyle if they were just looking for someone to ignore them. When I am in the mood, I look for slow, steady kisses, floating in the pool, the smell of warm jasmine in the air. No place I'd rather be. Sucking on ice, spread-eagled in the sun. No pressure, no manipulations, no performances, no power plays at braais or in the front seat of cars. No screaming in the streets, no panicky phone calls about fucking parties, no drunken calls to fetch you, no logistics. Get your bag, don't forget your charger, and just use my toothbrush, it doesn't matter. No worries, no, you're welcome. No, I don't mind. No, hey gorgeous messages. Before 11:30 a.m., no sleepovers, unless you know. I like you a lot. I need my mornings just for me.
Patung Janine.
I think that the line that Janine just chose is so interesting, because it's the conversation that Letokonon and I were having earlier, right? And the discussion around desirability or the lack thereof, right? So desirability or undesirability, and what that looks like as it relates to sex. So who we choose to have sex with, how we choose to have sex, and how empowered we feel around sex in relation to desirability or undesirability. And so I wanted to speak a little bit around that, right? The notion of desirability or undesirability, and why that was so important for you to write about in the way that you did in this poem.
The statement desire is based on lack is a little bit of a crib from Esther Perel, who is a relationship expert, and she talks about desire as being something that you want, not something that you need, and not something that you have. So when I was thinking about what makes me want something, it is something that I don't know for certain I'm going to get. So when I look at how desirable a partner is for me, it's usually I look at people and I see complications. I don't always see their attractiveness right away. I just see somebody who's going to take something from me. Because if you're assigned a gender that is feminine, then you are expected to be a giver. You are expected to be a object that can be used. And your desirability is how much value you can get within a capitalist society. And that's annoying, generally. And I try and look past that when I'm thinking about, what do I want? And a lot of the time what I want is just peace. And so that's why I kind of wrote about these experiences that people speak about. And a lot of the experiences that are in that section are drawn from those perpetual conversations that we have on Twitter, that we have on about relationships. We kind of retread this ground the whole time. And usually it's these questions of status within a group, or it's questions of how much you're willing to make a performance of yourself to other people for your relationship. And I was just kind of frustrated with that, I guess, and all of those extra things that come with sex, because sex is never just a physical thing, because of all of the society around it.
I really love that you chose that particular section to read, right? Because I think about reading about Kim's piece, for instance, which we'll talk about later on. But I want to bring you in here, Kim. In your piece, you also speak about desire in a different context, right? So you speak about the idea of, as Janine has alluded to, we live in a particular society. And the society we live in finds certain people desirable and certain people not desirable. And undesirability then unbecomes us, right? In a sense that we start thinking something is wrong with us because we don't fit into the mold of society. And you talk a little bit about that in your piece, right? About this idea of certain bodies, right, are not found desirable and are not desirable enough to participate in sexual intercourse. So I want to bring you in here to think about like notions of desire for certain types of people.
Wow. Dang. I'm trying to think. Where did I say all of that? I don't know. I feel like in my piece, I speak quite a bit about just desire in essence, and about my own desires. And I think one of the things that I do say that I feel comes across in this piece is that as a feminine presenting person, I do have the right to take control of my sexuality and also of my sexual needs and my desires and people whom I desire, right? And so in this piece, I kind of take you through some of my sexual contacts, my little black book throughout my sexual history. And I describe, how I desired them or they desired me, and then this dance between us, and until it becomes something of a physical nature. And so, I think for me, in terms of the whole thing about desiring and being the desired and being the person who desires, I feel like that is something that I truly try to focus on here by writing about my sexual conquests or my sexual experiences, is that I do have that space and I can take up that space, and it doesn't make me anything else other than a human being who enjoys sex in a sex positive and maybe sex neutral way. I don't think about it in a negative manner. I don't see it as something bad because I'm a feminine presenting person taking power and going for what I want and for what the situation wants.
I actually think that this would be a great time to ask Kim to read from her piece. I think that there's just a taste for people who are listening at home who may wonder what Kim says in her piece, and who are definitely going to go and buy the book after they hear.
Okay, I'm trying to think who I should read from, or which person I should read.
Who I should read.
I should read. Okay, yeah, I'll do the one which was my first queer experience. Maybe that's nice. I had never thought of myself as queer, but the first time I met her, I knew we were meant to be, cliche as it may sound. One night, she kissed me in the car. Beast unleashed, I climbed onto her, transferring upon her 2 months of yearning for her touch. She slid her hand over me and gasped at my wetness. For you, just for you, I whispered. The first time she made me come, I saw my future, my present, and my past. I saw love. I saw pleasure. I saw my clit wafting away on beams of transcending vibrations, alignment. I felt water escape my vulva. I saw water on her face. I didn't know what had happened, but I could tell she liked it. She got onto her back and let me touch her, but I was scared. I had never been with someone with a vagina before. What if I disappointed her? She took my hand and said, just do it. I dove in and tasted my future inside of her.
Ooh. Ooh.
I mean, yes. What a waste.
Hey,
Sorry,
tasted my future inside. Okay, all right.
I think for me, what's been exact. So Liesl says that they loved your piece, and I guess the question for me is that a lot of the piece is about unbecoming, but there's also a lot of becoming that we're interested in the piece. And we see, and it's particularly interesting that you read from that section, which was your first queer experience. And there's a coming into your queer self, I suppose, that you write about. And I think Ntlokonolo and I were speaking about this earlier, that the journey of people coming into their queerness is interesting, because I think people have quite linear ideas of what that becoming looks like. And there's a very particular reason why you felt that it was important to include that piece in the book. And so I wanted to talk more about how writing this also helped you to reflect on your journey of becoming or coming into this part of your identity.
Yeah. So yeah, I think for me, it wasn't necessarily just writing this piece, but it was also experiencing this piece when I went through it, which was 8 years ago, when I became into myself and into my queerness. And I mean, even before I knew that I was queer and that I was a pan person who, it's not about genitalia, it's just about whoever I like. I was never really close to the idea of certain things. I just never had an experience with somebody that made me feel like it was going to be a real thing. And so I think, I feel like so my becoming always feels a little bit different. Like when I speak to other queer people, as much as it was a very, very transcending experience and a very peak of, I don't know, just as much as it was an amazing experience and this incredible opening up of a whole new world and a whole new realm for me, sexual, physical, mental, spiritual, whatever, it didn't feel unwelcomed, and I hardly ever felt any shame. And I think that comes from my upbringing as well. As much as my parents weren't ever saying, oh, you're a lesbian, or oh, you're a bisexual, or you're a pansexual, they never really closed myself or my sibling off from having any experiences. I didn't grow up in a homophobic household or a biphobic household. So yeah, I think for me, it was just this writing about it and experiencing that just felt like the natural next step. I didn't hold any shame, and I think I'm lucky for that.
Might as well.
Yeah.
Might as well be finger deep inside someone. Why not?
Or 2 or 3.
That's true, Tim. Tiff. I think what your piece also does, Kim, which is a little bit of a harder conversation, so trigger warning to anyone watching this, is that your piece also speaks about acquiring language at a later stage. So the idea of like certain sexual encounters, and I want to give it to Kim, but for all of us to sort of reflect on this, right? So there are moments where we've had sexual encounters and we now know that those sexual encounters may not have been consensual. And what that definitely means is that those sexual encounters were rape. But there's something that you do in your piece which is really interesting. So now we know that you've acquired the knowledge because you reflect on it, but you don't name it, right? And so I want to speak a little bit about that, right? The idea of like us not naming things because what it means for us to name it, right? So we, they say naming the violence is political, but sometimes you just want to step away and say, I'm giving you this experience and I know it's happened, but I'm not going to name it. So just to think about that, about like this idea of acquiring knowledge, but knowing that sexual encounters that we've had have not been consensual, but we will never call those sexual encounters sexual assault or rape.
But also to add to that is to speak to, Kim, is to speak to the limitations of language in naming the things that we experience, right? And I think that so much of that, or the ways in which we're able to name or not name things that happen to us, also speaks to the limitations of language as it relates to sexual encounters, to sexuality, to intimacy as well. And so it's to also think about the ways in which even those limitations exist in our framing of the things that happen, right?
Yeah. So I will say in this specific piece, I don't call it rape because, and there's a specific reason for that. Because I've written about this person before and I've called it sexual assault and I've called it what it is at the time of me realizing that is what it was, right? But because this takes you through my journey, I had to make that decision to not call it that because I wanted to leave. I even end that paragraph with a question: what was different now, to it happening just an hour before? There was just one slight difference in it happening later on in the night. And so that was a very intentional thing on my part because I wanted the reader to read it and be left with that question and then answer it for themselves, because it took me many years to answer it for myself as well. Due to the lack of knowledge, but I wouldn't say it was the lack of knowledge. I think I always knew what it was. I just think because our lives at that time was very entangled, we were dating, and so that also brings another topic into, or another theme into this, and another complication into the way that you think about it as you're going through that journey, because you were dating this person. They were a little bit of a bad boy. I called them, that type of white guy who would smash the wall when they got angry. So it was that type of nuance in my understanding of what had happened. Yeah. And so that's why in this specific piece, I don't mention it by name, but I have done it in other pieces. But yeah, it did take me a very long time to call it that in public. Before, it was just like, okay, I know that happened, but I wasn't going to let it affect my sexual nature and who I am, right? Because that would have killed me far more than what that experience did. So yeah, I feel like I answered that.
Well, I want to bring Tiff and then Sia and then Janine in here. Just to think about that, right? Like, I think that we often, as Kim has said, like, they have already written about this person and named it. But I think that there are often reflections in the way that we've participated in sexual contact and sexual intercourse. And we know now, but possibly not then, that was rape or sexual assault. And how do you think knowing that information now impacts how you relate to other people? So I'll start with you, Tiff.
So I think having like a deeper understanding has made me like look back personally on like a lot of interactions and a lot of ways that I've related to people. And for a little while, it made me feel very unsafe, because it almost made me feel like even I was not cognizant of the things that were happening to me, right? And then that also just sort of spurs that cycle of like shame and that cycle of like, if I didn't know, then did it happen type thing, like, So I think for me, for a long time, it made me feel unsafe. It still makes me feel thunderously unsafe around heterosexual men, because now I'm like thinking back and I'm like, I but boss, no, that's not a real thing. And it's just also just that process of trying to like the way Kim was saying, just deciding not to like let it sit in your bones, because these things you realize that they've been sitting in your bones for a long time, and then sort of like unearthing those bones within yourself can be a very painful process and can be like a semi-traumatic process in itself. Just the act of realization, yo, English, respect me, the act of realizing, please. So yeah, I think for me, that's where just sort of the thinking around that is at this moment in time. Yeah.
Sia, we want to bring you in here. What are some of your reflections around and I think just to complicate it a little bit, right? The shame also plays a little role in this, right? So we know that queerness as a whole has been pitted as something that is sinful and something that is uncultural. So even when these things may happen to us that may be not consensual, the one thing that we do is we say, I deserved it because I was not supposed to be this person. But then the other thing is that we are afraid to come forward because it's shameful. And so I just want to complicate a little bit to think about those reflections and how religion and culture may complicate how we come to knowing that it's non-consensual.
Well, when you mention religion and culture, what happens for me is you've now got 3 different realities, and they each have their own language. So you're not just dealing with the language, the difference between the language and the reality, or the map and the territory of one experience, which is a sexual experience. You're also explaining it through these other filters. And how I understand Kim's decision at that point is, at some point you need to ask yourself, does the inside of this experience, and so I don't mean to use the word inside, and we were just talking about a future being, does this experience match the language that is being brought to it, or is there something ineffable or incommunicable about it that is very personal? I'm trying to share it with the world, as well as how much weight I put on this experience, how much gravitas in the course of my life. And at some point, you have to make a decision about what it means to you. And it's a decision I'm still thinking about myself, but it does also make me cognizant of what I did in my piece. For an example, is I spoke a lot about the roads I traveled. So again, I never mapped my experiences, or I couldn't at the time map my experiences in terms of intersectional, feminist, this, that, the other. I did not know those terms. What I knew was when I got on a taxi from Umlazi to Durban, I was switching from Zulu to English. I was code switching from one language, one texture of existence to another. And if I had encountered something that was racist beyond those, I would have not thought of it as racist. It was just a thing that I dealt with on its own terms, navigated it. I didn't have a dictionary I could pull out and say, wait a minute, that's a microaggression. And there's an innocence that gets lost. And at the same time, there's an empowerment that comes with knowing the words and knowing how many other people have experienced the same things, how many people use the same hashtags about them. But there definitely is an end to the person you were then, before the weight and the texture of the words informed how you integrated those experiences. I don't know if that's of any value.
So I think that you've said something so interesting for me now that I think of your piece. So you relate to the reflections on who you were then and who you are now. And there's a part in the book where you're 19 and your partner is 32, right? And Sia's laughing, but and you think of the power differentials that exist. I think that in the conversations that we've had around consent, so much of that has been, if somebody's of legal age and they can consent, then that person has consented. But what I think has also come from some of those conversations are ideas around power differentials, even at the age of consent, right? And ideas around, even in queer relationships, those heteronormative ideals that some people then carry through, right? So what does that look like when you're 19 and your partner is 32? What does that reflection look like? And for me, that is just something that I was interested in reading your piece, because there's the person that you were were then, and there's a person that you are now, and what does that look like in reflecting on some of those experiences?
So it wasn't just 19 and 32. There was also 21 and 33. There may have been a pattern, okay, that needs to be thought about. And in hindsight, so when I was 21, for an example, dating a 33-year-old, he kept stressing how much of a difference there was between our life experiences, between our worlds. And at the time, I had no idea what he meant. I knew it conceptually. I knew it like up here, but I didn't know. And then time, and this is why I believe this is why we age. Time teaches you. Like you know at the and this I was thinking about this when Letokonodo asked a question about desirability. Because a lot of the pieces also talk about who was socialized to desire, what was socialized to believe we should aspire to, what you fall short of, all of those things. And I've questioned whether you can take the beliefs that have gone into your very cells, into your very muscle memory, you can take them out and just replace them in one lifetime, because you can do it up here. But I think you can only do that kind of work for the next generation. That might be a defeatist view, but I'm starting to settle into it. You can re-engineer your politic up to a point, and then beyond that, there is a knowing or an experiencing that cannot be put into words. When I was 19, 21, not even realizing at the time that I wanted to become a writer, I believed all experience could be reduced to words. I really believed all knowledge, all experience could be reduced to something I could explain in an essay. So this is the danger of school. Like, yo, guys, school, it's a scam. I'm joking. So I really believed all knowledge could be reduced to that. And then you have experiences that are utterly beyond what can be communicated. And like, I'm thinking again about Kim's piece. That was a mystical experience that you had in that car, just by the way. Like, it was, but wasn't it's direct revelation. It's angels sang your there was alignment, that's vibrational. And words are kind of like, wow, this is sounding so meta. Words are like the signposts or the labels we put to point in the direction of those things, but they're not the experience, which is one of the reasons I love writing about sex, because you get as close to describing that experience, that kind of experience, as you can in words. And if you told me when I was 21 or 19 that I would one day write about sex, I would have denied it. I was very innocent. That's the other thing that's changed. I was terribly innocent.
So, Sia,
Sia, I must problematize your use of the word innocent, because I don't think that innocence is completely separate from sexuality. I think you can be sexual and innocent. Maybe you
I
are.
was hoping somebody would say that.
Maybe you're a little bit prudish when you were a child.
But also,
I am
what is innocence? What does innocence look like in the frameworks that have been provided, right? Like, what is because you think about the framing.
You see, this is the thing of chastity, of the shame that is associated, the shame and the elevated value of the chaste, of withdrawing sex, because sex has a value within a capitalist society.
Come on, Janine.
No, the thing is, it's based on forced scarcity. Well, how do you know something is valuable in capitalism? You can't get it. So everyone tells you can't get sex, you can't do this, you can't have the perfect experience, it's never going to happen. And then you think this must be the most valuable thing in the world because nobody has it. But it's not. You can have an orgasm with anybody. And it is innocent. And innocence is common. And, sluts are wonderful. And we know this. They're generous people. And generosity is wonderful and common. And we should encourage it.
Oh, come on, Nina. We are
the
innocent
rule.
right now. I mean,
But also,
come on, Janine.
the idea of who gets to be innocent, right? Like there are people for whom they will never ever be seen of as innocent, right? In the sense in which innocence gets used in our society. So you think about how Black women of color, right, will get called fast, will get called all of these things for really exploring just like what is natural, right? So you see a brown girl talking to a boy, and suddenly there's a loss of innocence in ways that would never happen to anybody else. So even that framing of who gets to be innocent in our society is itself just not, it's not innocent, right? That in itself is not innocent.
So
who owns
in?
right? White women's tears, hashtag.
May I jump in on that?
Yeah.
So again, this is where words are slippery, because what is the word for? That was my understanding of innocence when I was 19 or 21 and I was church going and whatnot, as opposed to what it is now, where there's a wholeness to my understanding of innocence. It's more like being integrated. And the quick answer to the question that's come up is, the very quick answer is absolutely. I think the quick answer to that is just absolutely. But so this is again where words are kind of slippery, because my idea of innocence then was, I nearly said I was such a good boy. So that's that's the
You see, this is your old brain architecture coming up. You're walking along the same street that you know in your brain.
Yes, that much I'll admit. That much I'll admit to.
Janine is my stand. I stand. Sia, so speaking about innocence, right? I think one of the things that your piece does is something that you've spoken a lot about in different mediums, is that sex reveals the truth of who we are, right? So you've often said sex is the closest thing to God. So can you please, before we get into sexing, just take us through the sex, ne? So read us through the sex so that we can also be close to the sex.
Okay. The title of my piece is Waiting to Inhale. And yes, I just checked what the title of my piece is. I'd met him 6 years before that, when I was 19, dating a 32-year-old. No, actually. He drank his weight in rosé. I was 19 and I didn't drink at the time. He had all sorts of ideas about having a stable of boyfriends exclusively devoted to him. I told him what I thought of his ideas, but he didn't listen to me. He was Catholic, and despite his relatively high-profile job, he stayed in a back room on his mother's property. I imagine his extended family needed him there financially. His father had just died, and among the Catholic paraphernalia in his room, he kept a crucifix on a high shelf. I asked him why it was turned towards the door. He explained that every time he had sex, he turned it away. It was turned away that day, and I was there along with one of his other boyfriends. I was 19. He was 32. He didn't listen to my wild egalitarian ideals until one day. On that first day, he took me to his home. That other boy kissed me the moment his back was turned. Can I just skip a few lines down? All right. As speeches droned on, Mr. L section, spurred on by the rosé whose empty crates had the waiters tripping around us, got closer to me. The smell of that cologne was fireworks, electric flowers exploding off his cool dark skin, shining blue under the lights. Fondling became nuzzling, and with embarrassingly little provocation, I went from being the sweet, shy boy who'd been nodding dutifully at his colleagues' cautions about him, to a gyrating mess being hickied in full view of total strangers. Yeah. That is the word of the Lord. As the
I see you sort of were you want people to read the sort of saucy bits by themselves, right, and not here, and that's fine. That's all right.
No, they're like all these subplots. It's like Game of Thrones.
I get it. They must buy the book if they want to see the.
That's the one. That's the one.
So one of the many reflections that I had about your piece is there has been this culture, right, particularly in sort of what we call cisgender gay culture, about this agenda of of verse is life and the verse agenda, verse sex is the best sex, right? And like I want to problematize that, right? And I want to say that the sex that you have is the best sex for you. So it doesn't need to be verse sex. It needs to be the sex that you want to have, right? But your piece made me think about like mutual pleasure, right, as the best sex, right, and whatever mutual pleasure looks like. But it also made me think about like our obsession with versatility as an agenda is that we are afraid to dismantle the dichotomies of top bottom outside of the bedroom. So we are quick to just put it in the bedroom, but we're not talking about like what it means when a top acts a particular masculine head of the household type of way outside of the bedroom. Or whatever, when a bottom is expected to be docile and femme and submissive outside of the bedroom. So I was interested in that bit, right? Just the idea of like, on the one hand, mutual pleasure being the best type of pleasure, but also moving away from the idea of thinking verse sex fixes the problems that we have about roles outside of the bedroom.
So this is one of the reasons I wanted to believe that words could dismantle anything when I was younger, because most people take those power dynamics and they make them personal and sexual and verse whatnot, not in a way I was not ready to grapple with at that age. So I intellectualized everything, my logic being, look, if we can just show rationally, I almost sound like the DA side was saying this, sorry. So if we can just show rationally that so-and-so should be charged of this because they are the best at it, merit, all of those things, then it takes the sting out of, or it lowers the stakes, the power stakes that we bring to sex, that we bring to patriarchy, masculinity, that we've tried to make versatility solve for us. And one of the things I'm wondering now is, where will we put that problem next? Because being versatile is not going to solve it. Words are not going to solve it. Into what other contexts are we going to push that power, those power inequalities? And I don't know the answer, because we see it all the time. I mean, in the queer activist space, we've seen another differential. There's some organizations that are more powerful than others. So in the very spaces that were supposed to dismantle these issues, we've seen the issues replicated. So every time you take out one oppression, you kind of grow another in its place. So one of the questions I've been wrestling with philosophically, and I'm trying to dump it or to part ways with it and get out of my head, is what is the difference between justice and power? Like, how is justice different from reconfigured power? Because until we can get hold of that difference, all we're going to do is move the problem from the bedroom to society, to the next place, from racism to misogyny, from misogyny to transphobia. Like, we're going to keep shifting it around, thinking that this way of fitting into society, maybe being that versatile, straight, cis acting gay person is going to fix it. All it does is it buys you a seat at the table that was never made for you in the first place. So no, I actually don't know the answer to your question, but I do notice that problem shifts around from subject to subject, topic to topic.
Janine, I wanted to know, what are some of your reflections, right, about like, as Sia, I think, puts it, it's like shifting the goalposts, right? So in many instances, we're making sex a little bit more complicated. Also, I just think knowledge, now I'm entering sex with this knowledge that if Janine touches my neck a particular way, it's a power differential that reminds me of, are there certain power outside of the bedroom as well? So what are some of your reflections about that?
Well, I think this talks to the subject of vocabulary and naming things, right? And we've been speaking now about like, oh, now I've remembered back in the day I actually was sexually assaulted. Oh dear, what shall I do with this information now? You start speaking to your therapist about these things, and then you discover, oh, I can't prosecute someone for this. How will I continue with my life knowing that I am a survivor now? You have all of these connotations that are brought to your experience through language. And so we seek to find other words that match our experience a bit better. And I think that, we've been speaking about that. And these shifting power dynamics are also something that speak to that personal growth that you realize later on. But I think that during these experiences, there is a basis that you realize that something is flawed. I mean, looking back at the experiences that I've had that I later realized were not so consensual, at the time I didn't enjoy it. And I thought, oh, well, something about that makes me remember it as something I need to unpack a bit more. So there is a knowledge in a part of you that something is going right or something is going wrong. And I think that also speaks to Sia's theory that you can only develop so much. I think you can develop quite a lot and you can become better, but I think there isn't a point in time that you are absolutely ignorant that you're doing something wrong. If you are using incorrect pronouns for people, if you are slurring people, if you are assaulting people, you know that it's not good behavior. You just tell yourself it's not as bad as what everyone says, or it doesn't meet the definition of what everyone says is a crime, and you try and change the language in your head. But what maybe you should be doing is thinking, why am I uncomfortable with this experience? Why am I uncomfortable with my own behavior? I mean, that's how I think about these things on a micro level, because I'm not in a macro decision-making position in society. I can really only deal with my interpersonal relationships. So the way that I try and translate politics into my personal experience is to name what I'm seeing using politics, but also filtering politics through my moral lens and looking through it and saying, is this hurting or helping people generally? So I think when we speak about consent, when we speak about power dynamics in a relationship, it's never really been that okay for a 30-year-old person to go out with someone who just came out of school. It's weird. Like, it's always been a little bit weird. Even in the past, those people are weird. So I find myself in these conversations with people thinking like, but you know that that's a bit strange. Don't tell me you never knew. Like, you didn't suspect that it was a little bit. I think you did know. But there were all these other negative and problematic things that led people to those decisions. And I think that this also kind of, in my life, I see it through an abolitionist lens, right? Abolitionists say that we are not trying to make a punitive society. We are trying to remove those elements that lead us to make these bad decisions. So, or not make these bad decisions, make bad decisions in hurting other people, but also have these negative environments that allow us to rationalize these experiences as being positive when they are absolutely negative. So, like, when I think about these experiences of sexual violence that I've had or that I've been a part of, instead of thinking like, oh, now I must deal with my trauma. Obviously, I think that at times, but I also think if I have to look at this through the lens of how do I stop this from happening to someone else? Because that's the point of restorative justice, right? We don't want to repeat those negative, those toxic systems in our own lives. So I try and look at that situation and say like, okay, here I was, all of these things were going on. What were these things that influenced this event? And how can I reconcile myself in my environments in my life that I can try and remove harmful patterns of behavior or harmful people that are around me? How can I protect myself and my community? And I think that if I have to introduce a topic here, in queer spaces, a lot of the time, something that prevents us from coming forward and makes us repeat these terrible heterosexist patterns is that we think, oh yeah, we're so different, we're so enlightened, we know everything because we're queer, and then we go in and assault each other and, you know, and hide abusers in our midst. We do all the same things that straight people do. We hit each other, we rape each other, we do all sorts of bad things to each other. And it's not because of our queerness that we are suddenly all happy family, rainbow nation. We're not. We do repeat those terrible mistakes, and we must find a way that we can eradicate that infrastructure from our mind. We must destroy that harmful temple.
Ooh, girl, Janina's just taking us to church. I am having a moment, multiple moments. Okay, I am in church. Let the church say amen. Okay.
Amen.
Hallelujah. All right. Tiff, we need to talk about your piece because wow. Tiff, no, you're not going to get off just like that. Can you please read from your piece so that we know what you were getting up to while the rest of us were in Zoom meetings?
As far as I know, I didn't submit anything. As far as I personally know, as the curator, I didn't submit anything, and I feel like we're out of time. Does no one feel that? No.
Yeah, okay. We've got plenty of time for that essay. The whole
thing. A letter that gives no fuck. Can we get to the letter that gives no fucks?
Okay, so I'll read a small vibe. 1, 2, 3 fingers inside myself. I didn't stop until a moan escaped my lips. The moment where I ran the remnants of satisfaction along my thigh, a half smile on my face. You could always make me wet. Make yourself come. Your ability to arouse me astounded me. I'm usually so contained, living the majority of my sexual life in my head. For me, sex had always been like the low hum of an old refrigerator in the background, the thoughts simply reverberating through space. But you had this uncanny ability to draw it out of me, to take me out of the cognitive and into the physical. Yeah.
Tiffany.
Let's talk. We are going to
live my life here, bruh.
We're going to talk today, Tiff. We're going to talk.
I want to talk about Alicia Nicole Harris is one of my favorite poets, and she has a poem called Cab Rides and the Morning After. And in Cab Rides in the Morning After, she says, I love it when you take these cab rides into yourself, right? And I think that is what your piece is really about, right? I think your piece calls us in to take these cab rides into ourselves, right? Your piece, for me, opens a space of vulnerability that I think many of us don't want to open, right? There are many moving parts in your piece, but I think that what I really liked about your piece is the idea of people seeing us outside of the sexual person, you know, the body, the actual body, you know. There's a part in the piece where you say, I gotta find it. You say, but beneath all of that, I was safe and seen. Maybe it was that. Maybe that is the key. The notion of my existence being held, if even for a moment, maybe that's what gets me off. And I want to talk about that, right? About the idea of intimacy outside of the sexual, that there are people who are able to allow us to tap into an intimacy that sex does not necessarily allow us to do. And just your reflections about that. Because I think that mainly what your piece is about is like, I miss the person that I was when I was with you, right? And I miss the person that you made me when I was with you. Yes, you making me come is amazing, but I actually just miss the person I miss that when I was with you, I was seen, right, and held even for a moment. So I want to talk a little about that, right, about the cap rights we take into ourselves and the people who allow us to do that.
Into ourselves, the opposite word, into.
So, like, you know, my response to this wants to be to make a lot of jokes to deflect, but like, yeah, no, this piece was ridiculously hard to write. I remember sending Kim messages from Cape Town in tears, writing it. And I think one of the things that like going through this and also writing the piece made me realize is that often we conflate sex with intimacy. So, and that's why even like within couples, the minute sex is not happening, we're on the rocks, we're doing this, we're that. But like, I think it was just the sitting there with this notion, because this person has never physically touched me. We've never even been in the same space. But yeah, all of this, no same space, but like to have everything that came with it and to have sort of almost the world that this person temporarily created around me in a way that I have not really had, because I'm one of those people. I'm like, what do you need? What do you want? Like, let me create life around you. And to have this person come and do that, even if it was very temporary, was just a lot. And I realized that is my kink, like, you know, because the different things that can be your kink, right? You know, it can be physical, but also it can be like spiritual, it can be cognitive, it can be a whole bunch of things. And for me, I realized that was my thing. And so it had to make me really unpack what desire meant to me, what intimacy meant to me, what made me wet, like literally down to the physiological, what makes me genuinely wet. And like, so now it's been a whole ton of time since me and this person went our separate ways, but like sort of the lessons are still there, right? And now I'm in this weird, I have a sex book out, but I'm in this weird flux where I'm trying to really reconfigure my sex, like reconfigure all the moving parts of it outside of just what instantaneously gets me off when somebody is physically in my space. It's a lot, like it's a lot. And I think it's not a lot of unpacking that a lot of people do, because you're like, this is what sex is. Oh my gosh, I tried this and this is what gets me off. But then you'll find that something that person A does and person B does, it hits different. And you can't quite put your finger on why it hits different. But it's because there's so much more to it. And I think that's what I love about this whole book in general, because everyone taught us all the different things that come into sex, be it race, gender, politics, your history, your this, your that. It's a lot. It's just a lot.
I love the vulnerability that you wrote this piece with, right? I think I saw someone post, I think Brene Brown said that vulnerability is a superpower, right? And of course, that stuff always just sounds so like quote worthy when you see people say it, but to see it in a piece is completely different, right? And Tlhogonolo and I were speaking about this, because you think of like when people speak about relationships that don't work out, so much of that is very negative. Like, this person sucked, that's why I dumped them, or that's why things didn't work out. But in the vulnerability that you display in this piece, there's things that you write about what relationships that don't work out can teach us about ourselves. And there's a reflection there that I am particularly interested in, because there's a reflection you do in the piece about what you've learned about yourself in this encounter that didn't quite work out in the way that you would have hoped that it would.
Yeah, no, that was one of the hardest things, because you know, you don't want to learn from somebody who hurt you, right? Because like low key, high key, this person, woo, if I saw them in the street, I might fight them. But right, but like there was still so much that came from it, and having to go through all the stages, the sadness, the anger, the resentment, the wanting them back, the, you know, having to still deal with them in Zoom calls because woo, it's a mess. But like having those pockets of moments where you're like, actually, there is something to be grateful for, because there is so much that I learned. And even though the lessons continue to this day to be sometimes painful, right? To be sometimes really uncomfortable, because lessons are very rarely like, oh my gosh, this was so brilliant. Like they're painful and they're uncomfortable, and you sit with them and it's, you know, 30 whatever years of this is how I thought about sex and this is how I thought about desire. And now that's no longer the case. And you're like, what must I do with these remnants, with these like pieces that I need to put together to be something new? And yeah, so I'm still kind of in that journey. And yeah, but like having to sit and actually admit to yourself that you learned something from this person is difficult. And I think that's why sometimes with relationships, we don't want to do it. We just want to be like, Patek, you were rubbish. I don't need this content. Forget you and the donkey you rode in on. Like, just no. Because you don't want to assign any beauty or any, anything to this person, because often breakups, 9 times out of 10, they really hurt. But yeah, like if you take a moment and you take a beat and you take a breath, yeah, you can find that you did learn, even from the most terrible situations. There's always something to learn.
But I mean, even they were saying how you have to be vulnerable while writing this piece, right? But I think it takes a higher grade level of vulnerability to then, as you say, try to reconfigure the power relations that you have with sex because of this relationship. So you can be vulnerable while writing, but then to accept those lessons from somebody that you now don't give a fuck about anymore is a higher grade level of vulnerability that, as you say, people don't want to deal with.
It's too hard to do.
Kudos to you, babe.
Oh, thank you, my love.
This
one had to be a playlist because I was crying. I was in Cape Town crying, and this one had to be like, here is a breakup playlist. And I'm like, it was a mess.
I want to bring Janine in here. I think that in many instances, your poem, and particularly the piece that you also read, is also vulnerability, and often very difficult vulnerability, because in many instances, we don't want to share these other parts of ourselves, right? So, I mean, you straight out say, I'm emotionally and physically unavailable, right? I only have 3 hours in the week.
It's just true. That's just a true thing. I work really hard. Like I just don't have time. It's weird. My family doesn't see me. It's weird.
and so, but I think also that vulnerability, the truth, right, and that vulnerability is also sometimes difficult for people to get, because I often say that people make times for the things that they love, right? And sometimes you're just like, yes, that's true. The things that I love is to listen to a playlist and have peace, right? And sure, in a utopian world, there would be someone to like be next to me, but nah,
No. In a utopian world, here's the thing. Okay, so I'm gonna put on my asexual hat. So there's this thing. It's called what is it called? Amatonormativity. Amato it comes from like Latin for amare, which is love, and normativity, to believe that it is normal. And this is the common idea that people have, that everybody desires to fall in love and to have one person with them all the time, and to have a child eventually, and for that child to get a good job and get married and have children, and we live in a society. And I don't want that at all. So when you bring up vulnerability in my poem, I think I did want to convey a certain level of vulnerability. I was going through a lot. There's a cat. Oh, hello.
Sorry.
It looks so pretty. I like it. What was I saying? Vulnerability and the poem. It was also influenced by the time of COVID-19. There was a lot of grief in my life, and the structure of the poem is set out in 3 parts. In the original form, it was 4 parts with a single line at the end. And I put it in these sections to mimic, kind of a process of prayer, because at that stage, I was doing a lot of memorial services. I was doing a lot of vigils and devotional practices from day to day. And I was raised Catholic. So within my cultural community, it is also a religious experience. and our religious experiences are very wrapped up in death and sex. So when I was thinking about sex, then I was obviously thinking about religion, and I was obviously thinking about death. And if you didn't know before, I am a Scorpio. So it's it's the common themes within this situation. It's very sex and death up in this piece. So it was in in 4 parts. The first part is modeled after a Catholic litany, which is to name everything that you know. And so I was just thinking about all of my gays, and I was naming them. And then the second part is supposed to be an appeal, in a way, like your prayer thing. Dear God, it's me, Janine. Here's what I want. And then the fourth part would be in the Catholic tradition. You have a charismatic and prophetic tradition, which is the prophetic tradition is to think about the theory of religion and to be more meta. And so I thought about the meta-ness and the theory of sexuality, and that's when all of the religious stuff also came in. And then the last line was supposed to be a version of my amen in the poem. It didn't make it into the last edit of the book, but it was written to seem conversational, to seem unfinished, to seem a little bit messy, because it's a messy time. Sex is a messy thing. Romance is messy. And all of that needed to be reflected for me. I needed to see it and speak it, if that makes sense. And I think that in relationships and in general, if you want to get what you want, you have to be vulnerable. There's no way to get what you want unless you ask for it. And so you have to know what you want, which is difficult because you have to then admit to yourself what you want. And in the queer experience, that's all shame and that's all the fucked upness of life. And then you're like, oh, I want this thing. And then you realize I will have to ask someone for it. And what if they kill me? Because I'm gay. So the vulnerability is very tied in with a material risk to your safety and to your life in general. And it is a very difficult and courageous thing to have sex as a gay person, or just as a person on a spectrum in general, or to admit to those things. You are not only being emotionally brave, you're being physically brave.
This is metaphorical.
And like financially brave.
I'm just like, here's my money, take it all, Janine, take all my money.
What I want.
I mean, you're not just risking heartbreak.
You're literally risking your life, right? Like you're literally putting your life at risk.
Exactly.
And we've seen in the last year that risk has material consequences, right? Like if we are to sort of investigate what some of the deaths that have happened, we may see that it was you being vulnerable to admit to yourself what you want and say what you want, and that saying leads to your death. So like, ooh, it's too much.
To think about like the hypervigilance and the anxiety that comes with existing as a queer person in a queer-phobic space, right? And with the constant threat of violence, what does that look like for self, right? And I think that we're seeing the medical world think about the kind of ways in which trauma affects our bodies, but I would like to see what that looks like in 10 years, what it's meant for a generation of queer people to watch almost every single day for an entire year, this whole year. We have just seen queer people be subjected to the worst kind of violence? And what does that look like? This constant states of hypervigilance and the anxiety, and what does that do to the body, right? And maybe there's a book in there somewhere. I'm just gonna put it up.
I kind of, my practice as Black queerness is to never end spaces in hardship, right? I just feel that there's so much hardship that we have in our everyday lives that we need to participate in some joy. So I want to ask each of you, before we go, what is your kink, right? So what is that one thing that that gets you going, or to use Tiffany's wording, that gets you wet?
I think Tiffany should go first.
Stressful. So to be really highbrow about this, I would say is being held and things like that. But to be really like practical, choking. I'm kind of into choking right now. Like shooken. Like it's something that I did not realize was like a thing that I shook it. At this whole big age, I'm like, this is something I could get behind. Gonna go next?
Yeah, I think I love to say that everything for me is mood dependent, but I do like a good wax play. If you burn me with a candle, that's great. But I also do like to be challenged. Stop it. I've got a dick candle there as well. I do, in terms of like when I'm with someone and we haven't done anything physical, I really do enjoy someone challenging me, like up here. And it can be about anything really, but if you challenge me and you make me gasp at words, I'm like, oh, I don't know, because I'm never left speechless. So if you leave me not knowing how to challenge you back anymore immediately, then I know I want you to stick around. But there's a whole lot of kinks that I like. As I say, it's mood dependent. So I hope the person that I end up with must also be mood dependent, because
I want the last one. The speechless one, I want that one as well.
Oh.
Shia, what about you?
I'm a bit anxious to say it because it's literally those things you.
Is it an age kink?
Sorry?
Is it an age kink?
no, Janine.
No, but that's normal. Now you're at a stage where you can go out with someone in their 60s. There's no problem. It's not weird.
That. And but the broad theme, I think, is it's not just age. I think it's things like the forbidden and the slightly risky. So you're in a car and there's a hand job happening, or you're about to get caught.
Oh, don't do that.
Or don't do this. Viewers, don't do this at home. Or you know that person, you're like, because they're dating a friend or they were dating a friend, and like whatever the situation is, you're like, you must never, ever, ever, ever do anything with that person. And then one day you do. And it's
Ooh, Catholicism has done a number on you.
Okay.
The sweetest taboo.
I am not even trying to say anything. I don't want to kink shame anyone on a Thursday at 7 o'clock.
I will never kink shame anyone except people who like race play. I will never kink shame Bible. I would say that I really like people who are playful. I really like people who are curious. And I really like people who want to do new things all the time. So I like exploring and doing fun things, and I like playing around. And I think that sex is very difficult and perilous. So, like, fuck it. Let's just have a ball, hey? Why not?
I just want to say that
let's get exciting.
That Kim may be doing certain gestures for you to notice them, Janine, if you haven't yet. So I'm just going to be like, Kim, you have Janine's number. Janine has your number.
A dating show.
If you want to make it happen consensually, make it happen.
Is this a podcast or a dating show?
I also
I
only
think that
have 3 hours with
I
you.
feel like
also
I
only have
very
3 hours
clearly
available,
stated
This is
I
crazy.
have very limited personal time. I
3
feel
hours
like it's
now.
in a book. I feel like I wrote it in a book that I don't have personal time.
All
have
we need
3
is that 3 hours.
3 hours.
You know, it's like I feel like I sent out a press release about what I would like for my life. And it included listening to music and not having sex.
So concerned.
I feel like I was really clear. And this is the issue we've been speaking about, listening to one another, the clarity.
No,
It's
people
so
must
there.
understand my Achilles heel is a Scorpio, okay? It's a Scorpio. I'm done.
But why? Everybody is always talking about Scorpios, but why?
Alma, I want to put you on the spot
I
as
feel
well.
like I said very clearly, I wrote it in a book and then I read it out in this podcast. That what I would be able to offer is me ignoring someone. That is what I'm able to offer. Ignoring you. If that is very sexy to you, I'll ignore all your messages. I don't have my read receipts on. I'll just mute the chat. Sex done. Easiest sex I've ever had.
What is, do you have a kink? I mean, I feel like I should put you on the spot.
I don't have no kinks, you know what I'm saying? I ain't got no kinks. No, I'm joking. I'm also gonna be a little bit highbrow. I think like one of my biggest kinks is just like being heard outside of the performance, right? Like so often you feel like you have to perform Black Girl Magic and just sound like ethereal and so intellectual. And there's a thing about just being heard outside of the performance. So the ability to be heard talking about Beyonce, who's a very intellectual subject, by the way. But to speak about the mundane, I think that there is an intimacy in the mundane, right? So like that you came home and you rubbed my feet and I didn't have to perform Black Girl Magic for you in order for that to be done. It's just is my kink. Yes, and that's all I can say because I'm sure my mother's watching this.
I just knew that your mom may be watching it. But to each of you, I want to say thank you. This has really been...
What's your kink? Sorry. What is your kink?
Don't try to get away with this.
We just laid ourselves bare for you to just hear.
Disclosure.
So I am waiting for marriage. So I will explore every and all possibilities.
But why are you making kinks related?
I don't understand. I feel like
we will drag you. We will drag you.
Marriage in this economy. Wow.
In this day and age, waiting for marriage can be a kink.
I will. This is.
I mean, maybe marriage. Maybe your kink is like having sex through the sheet with the hole,
Don't knock it till you've tried it.
Chapanella's kink
like
is
pure. No, it's like pure breeding, right? Like people have a breeding kink sometimes. Then they want to be like, sort of as just a baby making machine, just a breeder. And then they speak a lot about like, I'm going to have a child now after we have sex. And it happens between, people of all genders. Boom.
So
you do it through a sheet. The only thing that's happening there is kink. Then you'll just be like, yes, God is seeing us create this life. I feel like that is very kinky.
No. What is your kink? You will not end
marriage.
This life without telling us, no, we will not accept books without your kink.
Lalek says books. I will say this. There's something
about bearded men for you.
There's something about sitting on a face that's just like hot, just when you're like, you're stationed there, right? You're just like, you're stationed, like not you're not you are in control, you're driving the seat, type of thing. That's like kink. And then I want to say, Tiff, listen, I was choked and I was like, oh my gosh, where has this been all my life? I want it and I want more of it, right? And now I've obviously gone for lessons about how to do it safely so that you can breathe.
That's very important, because people be choking from the front and you're like, you can't kill me.
Exactly, it's not like this, y'all. It's not like this. It's a little on the side,
On the side. You want to restrict.
But also like make sure before you do that to somebody, because I've been choked without my consent and I saw my life flash before my eyes. It really wasn't fun.
All of this, and all of our kings are
and then afterwards, the thing is, we had a conversation afterwards. Here we go through a abolitionist praxis. I had a conversation with the person afterwards, and I said I was uncomfortable with that. And then they were like, but everybody on Twitter says, choke me, daddy. And I was like, but I didn't say that, did I? But I specifically had not said that. So, just make sure before you try new things with your person.
That is
or maybe we were talking, or maybe everybody on Twitter is talking about those scones that we get fed at funerals that are just totally dead. You must, guys, no, clarity is clear to see. It's actually very important.
Look, when you're in the heat of the moment, sometimes things happen in the heat of the moment, and we live and we learn. But I will say, for some people, ask before you just run in with the. This happens. The thing is, it happens with things that are within the zeitgeist at the moment. I think, like, there was a time when people also used to spank me and bite me without my consent, and then I'd be like, "Babes, we didn't talk about this, and now you are spanking me." Like, it's not that I don't like it. It's just like we did not talk about this, and all of a sudden.
This
we
has
have
been
to,
a really
use
wonderful time. As you can see, Touch, which is out now for adults only, allows us to, delve deeper into sex, sexuality, and sensuality. And, the Chickenators are so wonderful. If you want to get a book from us or get a copy of this book, we got you. So just email us at info@cheekynatives.co.za or DM us on all the social medias and let us know that you want a book. And perhaps we're going to do a little Touch limited edition situation. Watch this space, watch our social media, so that you can be part and parcel of the Touch experience. But Janine, Sia, Kim, and Tiff, thank you so much for being such wonderful touchies. And also thank you so much for the vulnerability and the honesty with which you wrote your pieces. And thank you for this. I think that we need more and more of this to begin to think of our sex as just sex and not to name it queer sex, but to say sex because what other sex are we having, babes? It's not queer because we're having sex. It's just sex, right? So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for holding space for us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And my
Thank
wish,
you for having us.
My wish, Janine, to you is for people to continue giving you the space to ignore them. I hope that
wish for more free time for me. Maybe one day I will become sexually active if I have more free time.
Maybe you'll have space for Kim in the free time.
Yes. Every day, wish for the downfall of capitalism. That would help me.
A word, an absolute word, a word. And on that note,
pray for it.
I wish for, I'm trying to, I wish for people who are like 25 to 30 to also participate with you and not 1932, But I also I hope that you continue having safe encounters that are forbidden. But please don't break up any homes or any marriages. Just like, please, I beg you.
Woo! The sweetest taboo.
Tiff, I think for you, just to continue walking and keep taking these cap rights into yourself, and to continue to teach us how to. I think in many instances you've allowed us to demystify the idea of self pleasure as like not sex, right? So to continue to get in tune with that self pleasureness, but also to heal. I wish healing for you so that you are able to have more amazing bilateral sexual encounters, you know.
Glorious, beautiful healing, yes.
Kim, I wish for you more space to become who you are. I think that it's beautiful to watch you unbecome what society has told you not to be and become who you want to be. So to continue to do that. Thank you to each of you for just the space, man. We really appreciate it.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to all the Chicken Natives, thank you for staying with us as we did this thing. If you want to catch this later, it will be up on YouTube. And stay in touch for more touch experiences.
Yes. Bye. Bye.